Question 1. The audit findings indicate a recurring issue with the accuracy of customer order data within a specific fulfillment center's inventory management system. To address this, a proposal has been made to implement a new data validation script. Which of the following represents the most appropriate approach to assessing the potential impact of this proposed script? Option A. Implement the script across all systems and then monitor for any reported customer complaints or system failures. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment that analyzes the script's effects on data integrity, system performance, downstream processes, customer experience, and compliance with relevant data handling policies. Option C. Immediately deploy the script to a small subset of the system to observe its immediate effects, and then roll it out if no obvious errors are detected. Option D. Rely on the developer's assurance that the script is robust and will resolve the data accuracy issues without requiring further analysis. Correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment that analyzes the script's effects on data integrity, system performance, downstream processes, customer experience, and compliance with relevant data handling policies. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term implications of data integrity and regulatory compliance. The pressure to quickly resolve audit findings can lead to shortcuts that compromise the thoroughness of an impact assessment, potentially leading to unforeseen consequences or non-compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the assessment is comprehensive, considers all relevant stakeholders and systems, and adheres to established Amazon policies and relevant data privacy regulations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and documented process for evaluating the potential effects of a change or issue. This aligns with Amazon's commitment to operational excellence and risk management. A thorough impact assessment ensures that all potential consequences, including those related to data security, customer experience, and regulatory adherence, e.g., data privacy laws like GDPR or CCPA if applicable to the data involved, are identified and mitigated before implementation. This proactive approach minimizes the risk of future issues, costly rework, and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate fixes without a proper impact assessment fails to consider the broader implications. This could lead to regulatory failures by inadvertently violating data privacy principles, such as the principle of data minimization or purpose limitation, if changes are made without understanding how they affect data processing activities. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential negative consequences on customers or the business. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few individuals, rather than a structured assessment, lacks objectivity and can lead to flawed conclusions, increasing the risk of operational errors and non-compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the scope of the impact assessment. This involves identifying all affected systems, processes, data, and stakeholders. Next, they should gather relevant information through a structured process, which may include interviews, system analysis, and documentation review. The assessment should then systematically evaluate potential impacts across various dimensions, e.g., technical, operational, financial, legal, ethical, customer. Finally, findings should be documented, reviewed, and used to inform decisions regarding mitigation strategies and implementation plans, ensuring alignment with Amazon's policies and applicable regulations. Question 2. To address the challenge of a client expressing a strong preference for a particular investment product that appears to be aggressive and potentially misaligned with their stated conservative risk tolerance, what is the most appropriate course of action for a financial advisor? Option A. Immediately recommend the client's preferred product, emphasizing its potential for high returns to satisfy their expressed interest. Option B. Advise the client that their preference conflicts with their stated risk tolerance and suggest they explore other advisors who may be more accommodating. Option C. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment to determine if the client's preferred product aligns with their financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives, and then discuss the findings and alternatives with the client. Option D. Proceed with recommending the client's preferred product, assuming the client is fully aware of its risks and has made an informed decision. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment to determine if the client's preferred product aligns with their financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives, and then discuss the findings and alternatives with the client. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate desire for a specific investment product and the advisor's fiduciary duty to ensure suitability. The advisor must navigate the client's stated preference against their actual financial situation, risk tolerance, and investment objectives. Misjudging this balance can lead to significant financial harm for the client and regulatory repercussions for the advisor. The challenge lies in providing objective, client-centric advice while respecting client autonomy. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing the client's best interests, aligning with the core principles of fiduciary duty and suitability requirements. This involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial circumstances, risk tolerance, and investment objectives before recommending any product, even if the client expresses a preference. This process ensures that any investment is appropriate for the client's unique situation, thereby fulfilling regulatory obligations and ethical standards. It emphasizes a holistic understanding of the client's needs over a single product recommendation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending the product solely based on the client's stated preference, without a suitability assessment, constitutes a failure to uphold fiduciary duty and violates suitability regulations. This approach prioritizes client demand over client well-being, potentially exposing the client to undue risk or unsuitable investment characteristics. It is ethically unsound and legally problematic. Suggesting the client seek advice elsewhere without attempting to understand their underlying needs or educate them on suitability is a dereliction of professional responsibility. While referring a client is sometimes appropriate, doing so without due diligence or an attempt to guide them towards suitable options can be seen as avoiding responsibility and failing to act in the client's best interest. Focusing only on the potential commission or profit from the product, irrespective of suitability, is a clear breach of ethical conduct and regulatory requirements. This approach is driven by self-interest rather than client welfare, leading to potential mis-selling and significant harm to the client. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the client's needs, goals, and risk profile. This involves active listening, probing questions, and a thorough review of their financial situation. Following this assessment, the professional should identify suitable investment options that align with the client's profile. If a client expresses a preference for a specific product, the professional must evaluate its suitability against the client's profile and provide clear, objective information about its risks and benefits, comparing it to other suitable alternatives. The final decision should be a collaborative one, based on informed consent and the client's best interests. Question 3. Governance review demonstrates that the marketing team is eager to integrate a large volume of newly acquired customer data from a recent promotional event into the existing customer relationship management (CRM) system to enable immediate personalized marketing campaigns. However, concerns have been raised regarding the completeness of consent documentation for all individuals and the potential for outdated or inaccurate contact information within the acquired dataset. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with data protection regulations and ethical data handling practices? Option A. Prioritize the technical speed of data ingestion into the CRM system, focusing on data transfer efficiency and addressing any potential data privacy issues only if they are flagged by automated compliance checks. Option B. Anonymize the entire dataset of newly acquired customer data before integration to eliminate any privacy concerns, even if it renders the data unsuitable for personalized marketing. Option C. Implement a phased data integration process that includes verifying consent for marketing purposes, validating data accuracy, and ensuring robust security measures are in place before adding the data to the CRM for personalized marketing. Option D. Immediately upload all new customer data into the CRM system to maximize the window for personalized marketing, assuming that consent was implicitly granted through participation in the promotional event. The correct answer is C. Implement a phased data integration process that includes verifying consent for marketing purposes, validating data accuracy, and ensuring robust security measures are in place before adding the data to the CRM for personalized marketing. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between maintaining operational efficiency and adhering to strict data privacy regulations. The need to quickly integrate new customer data for personalized marketing campaigns clashes with the legal and ethical obligations to ensure data accuracy, consent, and security. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with regulatory compliance, avoiding potential legal repercussions and reputational damage. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and compliant data integration process. This involves verifying the source and accuracy of the data, confirming explicit consent for marketing use, and implementing robust security measures before incorporating it into the customer database. This aligns with the principles of data minimization, purpose limitation, and accountability, which are fundamental to data protection laws. By conducting these checks, the company demonstrates a commitment to responsible data handling and mitigates the risk of unauthorized processing or data breaches. An incorrect approach that involves immediately uploading all new customer data without verification or consent confirmation fails to uphold data privacy principles. This could lead to the processing of inaccurate or irrelevant data, violating the principle of data accuracy. Furthermore, using data for marketing without explicit consent directly contravenes regulations that mandate lawful bases for processing personal data, such as consent. This constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure, exposing the company to fines and legal action. Another incorrect approach, which involves anonymizing all new customer data before integration, while seemingly protective, is also professionally unacceptable in this context. While anonymization can be a valid data protection technique, it would render the data useless for the stated purpose of personalized marketing. This demonstrates a misunderstanding of the practical application of data protection measures and an inability to balance compliance with business objectives. It suggests a lack of strategic thinking in data management. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on the technical aspects of data integration without considering the legal and ethical implications, is also flawed. While efficient data transfer is important, it does not absolve the company of its responsibilities regarding data privacy. Overlooking consent, accuracy, and security in favor of speed is a direct violation of regulatory requirements and ethical standards for data stewardship. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted approach. First, clearly identify the business objective and the data required. Second, thoroughly understand the relevant regulatory framework governing data privacy and marketing. Third, assess the risks associated with data collection, processing, and storage, including potential breaches and noncompliance. Fourth, develop a data handling strategy that integrates compliance by design, ensuring that privacy considerations are embedded from the outset. This includes establishing clear protocols for data verification, consent management, and security. Finally, regularly review and update these processes to adapt to evolving regulations and business needs. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that when a client expresses a strong preference for an investment strategy that appears to carry a higher risk profile than their stated objectives and risk tolerance would typically warrant, what is the most appropriate course of action for a financial advisor? Option A. Proceed with the client's preferred strategy, but omit any detailed discussion of the associated risks to avoid alarming the client. Option B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to explain the potential risks and benefits of their preferred strategy, assess its alignment with their overall financial goals and risk tolerance, and document the rationale for proceeding or recommending an alternative. Option C. Immediately implement the client's preferred strategy to respect their autonomy, assuming they have fully considered the implications. Option D. Politely decline to implement the client's preferred strategy and unilaterally select an alternative investment that the advisor deems more suitable based on their professional judgment. The correct answer is B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to explain the potential risks and benefits of their preferred strategy, assess its alignment with their overall financial goals and risk tolerance, and document the rationale for proceeding or recommending an alternative. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the fiduciary duty of an advisor to act in the client's best interest, particularly when that preference might lead to suboptimal outcomes or regulatory noncompliance. The advisor must navigate the client's autonomy while upholding their professional obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing the client's understanding and informed consent. It involves clearly explaining the risks and benefits of the proposed investment strategy, aligning it with the client's stated objectives and risk tolerance, and documenting this discussion. This aligns with regulatory requirements for suitability and client care, ensuring that any investment decision is made with full awareness and agreement, thereby mitigating future disputes and demonstrating adherence to ethical standards of transparency and diligence. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the client's preferred strategy without adequate explanation or risk assessment. This fails to meet the fiduciary duty of care and suitability, potentially exposing the client to undue risk and violating regulatory mandates that require advisors to understand and act upon a client's financial situation and objectives. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's preference outright and impose a different strategy. This disregards client autonomy and can damage the professional relationship, potentially leading to complaints and regulatory scrutiny for a lack of client centricity and poor communication. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with the client's preference while downplaying or omitting potential negative consequences. This constitutes a failure of transparency and honesty, which are fundamental ethical and regulatory pillars, and could lead to misrepresentation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the client's stated goals, risk tolerance, and financial situation. This is followed by an objective assessment of investment options, considering their suitability and potential risks and rewards. Crucially, open and honest communication with the client is paramount, involving a detailed explanation of recommendations, potential downsides, and alternatives. The final decision should be a collaborative one, based on informed consent and documented thoroughly. Question 5. The control framework reveals a minor, isolated instance where a standard approval step for a transaction was inadvertently skipped due to an urgent operational need. The transaction itself is valid and within established parameters, but the procedural bypass creates a gap in the audit trail. What is the most appropriate course of action to uphold the integrity of the control environment? Option A. Revert the transaction and reinitiate the process to ensure all steps are followed, even if it causes significant operational delay. Option B. Proceed with the transaction and assume the deviation will not be detected, as the transaction is otherwise compliant. Option C. Immediately document the deviation, explain the circumstances, and seek retrospective authorization from the designated authority. Option D. Ignore the deviation, as it is minor and unlikely to cause any significant issues. The correct answer is C. Immediately document the deviation, explain the circumstances, and seek retrospective authorization from the designated authority. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between maintaining robust internal controls and the need for operational efficiency. The pressure to expedite a process, even with a minor deviation, can lead to a compromise of established procedures designed to mitigate risk. Careful judgment is required to balance these competing demands, ensuring that any decision aligns with the company's risk appetite and regulatory obligations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the established control framework. By documenting the deviation and seeking appropriate authorization, the individual demonstrates a commitment to transparency, accountability, and risk management. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, which emphasize the importance of maintaining auditable trails and ensuring that exceptions are managed through defined processes. This proactive stance prevents potential future issues and reinforces the integrity of the control environment. An incorrect approach that involves bypassing the documented control process and proceeding without authorization represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This action undermines the integrity of the control framework, creating a precedent for future noncompliance. It can lead to undetected errors, fraud, or misstatements, which could result in regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and financial losses. Furthermore, it demonstrates a lack of professional integrity and disregard for established procedures designed to protect the company and its stakeholders. Another incorrect approach, such as ignoring the deviation and hoping it goes unnoticed, is equally problematic. This passive approach fails to address the identified control weakness and leaves the organization exposed to potential risks. It can be interpreted as negligence and a failure to act in the best interests of the company. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's control framework and risk management policies. When a deviation is identified, the professional should first assess the potential impact and likelihood of adverse consequences. If the deviation is minor and the risk is deemed acceptable, the next step is to follow the established procedure for documenting and seeking approval for such exceptions. This typically involves informing relevant stakeholders, explaining the rationale for the deviation, and obtaining formal sign-off. If the deviation poses a significant risk or cannot be adequately mitigated, the professional should escalate the issue to higher management or the relevant control function for guidance and decision-making. This structured approach ensures that decisions are made with full awareness of the risks and in compliance with internal policies and external regulations. Question 6. Consider a scenario where you are tasked with analyzing customer purchasing patterns to identify potential areas for product improvement as part of an Amazon hiring assessment test. You have access to a large dataset of customer transactions. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the regulatory framework and ethical guidelines for handling customer data in this context? Option A. Anonymize the customer transaction data by removing all personally identifiable information, and then analyze the aggregated purchasing trends to identify common product categories and purchase sequences. Option B. Access and analyze individual customer transaction data, assuming that all customers have implicitly consented to such analysis by making a purchase. Option C. Utilize publicly available customer reviews and social media posts related to Amazon products to infer purchasing patterns, without directly accessing transaction data. Option D. Directly analyze individual customer transaction histories to identify specific product preferences, and then infer broader patterns from these individual profiles. The correct answer is A. Anonymize the customer transaction data by removing all personally identifiable information, and then analyze the aggregated purchasing trends to identify common product categories and purchase sequences. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the ethical and regulatory obligations to protect customer privacy and data security. The pressure to deliver insights quickly can lead to shortcuts that violate these principles. Careful judgment is required to ensure that data is accessed and used only in ways that are permissible and ethical. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it adheres strictly to the Amazon hiring assessment test's stipulated regulatory framework, which emphasizes data privacy and responsible data handling. By seeking explicit consent and anonymizing data where appropriate, this approach upholds the principles of informed consent and data minimization, which are foundational to ethical data use and compliance with data protection regulations. This proactive stance ensures that insights are gained without compromising individual privacy or violating trust. An incorrect approach that involves accessing customer data without explicit consent for the purpose of generating insights for the assessment is a direct violation of data privacy regulations and Amazon's own ethical guidelines. This failure erodes customer trust and exposes the company to significant legal and reputational risks. Another incorrect approach, which involves using publicly available but sensitive customer information without considering the context or potential for re-identification, also fails to meet the standard of responsible data handling. Even if data is public, its aggregation and analysis for a specific purpose without clear consent can still be ethically problematic and potentially breach implied privacy expectations. A third incorrect approach, which relies on assumptions about customer behavior without verifying them through appropriate, consented data analysis, leads to unreliable insights and potentially flawed decision-making, undermining the very purpose of the assessment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical considerations and regulatory compliance. This involves first understanding the specific data privacy laws and company policies applicable to the situation. Next, they should identify the objective and determine what data is truly necessary to achieve it. Crucially, they must assess the consent status of the data and if necessary, implement mechanisms to obtain consent or anonymize data before use. If there is any doubt about the permissibility of accessing or using data, the professional should err on the side of caution and seek guidance from legal or compliance departments. Question 7. The investigation demonstrates that a company has collected customer data during the onboarding process for its primary service. The company now wishes to use this data, including purchase history and browsing behavior on their platform, to personalize marketing communications and offer targeted promotions for complementary products from third-party partners. Company's current privacy policy mentions data usage for service improvement and marketing, but does not specifically detail the sharing of data with external partners for their promotional activities. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the company? Option A. Update the privacy policy to explicitly state the intention to share data with third-party partners for targeted marketing and obtain explicit opt-in consent from customers before proceeding with this data sharing and personalized marketing. Option B. Proceed with sharing the aggregated and anonymized customer data with third-party partners, assuming the existing service improvement and marketing clause in the privacy policy covers this activity. Option C. Implement a system where customers can actively opt out of data sharing with third-party partners if they do not wish to receive personalized marketing from them, relying on the existing privacy policy's general marketing clause. Option D. Utilize the customer data for personalized marketing and targeted promotions internally, without sharing it with third-party partners, as this falls under the broad interpretation of marketing in the current privacy policy. The correct answer is A. Update the privacy policy to explicitly state the intention to share data with third-party partners for targeted marketing and obtain explicit opt-in consent from customers before proceeding with this data sharing and personalized marketing. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire to leverage customer data for business growth and the stringent data privacy regulations designed to protect individuals. The need to balance innovation with compliance requires a nuanced understanding of legal obligations and ethical considerations. Careful judgment is essential to avoid severe penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of customer trust. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes obtaining explicit, informed consent from customers before utilizing their data for any purpose beyond the initial service provision. This aligns directly with the principles of data protection regulations, which mandate transparency and user control over personal information. By clearly outlining how data will be used and providing an opt-out mechanism, the company demonstrates a commitment to lawful and ethical data handling, fostering trust and mitigating legal risks. An incorrect approach that involves using data without explicit consent, even if anonymized or aggregated, fails to meet the legal threshold for data processing. Regulations typically require a lawful basis for processing, and consent is a primary basis. Without it, the processing is likely unlawful, leading to potential fines and legal action. Another incorrect approach, which relies on vague or buried privacy policies, is also professionally unacceptable. Such practices are often considered deceptive and do not constitute genuine informed consent. Regulators scrutinize these methods, viewing them as attempts to circumvent data protection obligations. A third incorrect approach, assuming that data collected for one purpose can be repurposed without reconsent, violates the principle of purpose limitation, a cornerstone of data privacy law. This demonstrates a disregard for the specific permissions granted by the customer. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough risk assessment, consulting legal counsel specializing in data privacy, and adopting a privacy-by-design approach. This means embedding data protection considerations into all business processes and product development from the outset, prioritizing customer rights and transparency, even if it means a slower pace of data utilization, is crucial for long-term sustainability and ethical business conduct. Question 8. Process analysis reveals that a critical project deliverable requires data that has been provided by your direct manager. Upon reviewing the data, you notice a significant discrepancy that deviates from expected patterns and historical trends. Your manager has emphasized the urgency of completing the project by the deadline and has implicitly suggested that the provided data should be used as is to meet this timeline. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Proceed with using the data as provided by your manager, prioritizing the project deadline over the observed discrepancy. Option B. Politely inform your manager of the discrepancy, request clarification, and suggest a brief pause to investigate the data's accuracy before proceeding. Option C. Independently attempt to correct the data without consulting your manager or any official data validation procedures. Option D. Ignore the discrepancy, assuming it is a minor issue that will not significantly impact the project outcome. The correct answer is A. Proceed with using the data as provided by your manager, prioritizing the project deadline over the observed discrepancy. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a desire to please a direct supervisor and the obligation to adhere to established company policies and ethical guidelines. The pressure to deliver a project quickly, coupled with a direct request from a superior, can create a strong temptation to bypass necessary procedural steps. Careful judgment is required to balance team efficiency with compliance and data integrity. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes data accuracy and adherence to established Amazon policies. By flagging the discrepancy and seeking clarification through the proper channels, the employee upholds the integrity of the data, which is crucial for informed decision-making and maintaining customer trust. This aligns with Amazon's leadership principles, particularly invent and simplify, by identifying a potential flaw to improve processes, and earn trust by being transparent and accountable. It also implicitly follows the spirit of any internal guidelines regarding data validation and reporting accuracy. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the data as provided by the supervisor, despite the known discrepancy, represents a significant ethical and professional failure. This would lead to the propagation of inaccurate information, potentially resulting in flawed business decisions, wasted resources, and a breach of trust with stakeholders who rely on the data's accuracy. It demonstrates a lack of integrity and a failure to uphold professional responsibility. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the discrepancy and hope it resolves itself, is equally problematic. This passive stance allows an error to persist, undermining the reliability of the data and potentially leading to the same negative consequences as actively using inaccurate data. It signifies a lack of proactivity and a failure to take ownership of potential issues. A further incorrect approach, such as confronting the supervisor aggressively or making assumptions about their intent, is unprofessional and counterproductive. While the discrepancy needs to be addressed, method of communication is critical. Such an approach could damage professional relationships and hinder a collaborative resolution. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Identify the discrepancy. Recognize and document any inconsistencies or potential errors. 2. Consult relevant policies/guidelines. Refer to internal Amazon policies, procedures, and leadership principles that govern data handling and reporting. 3. Seek clarification through appropriate channels. Engage with the supervisor or designated point of contact in a professional and objective manner to understand the discrepancy. 4. Escalate if necessary. If the issue cannot be resolved through initial communication, follow established escalation paths within the company. 5. Prioritize accuracy and integrity. Ensure that all actions taken uphold the accuracy and reliability of information. Question 9. Operational review demonstrates a consistent pattern of minor discrepancies between reported customer engagement metrics and actual user activity logs. While these discrepancies are currently within acceptable internal variance thresholds, they are trending upwards. The team responsible for reporting is under pressure to meet ambitious quarterly targets. What is the most professional and ethically sound approach to address this situation? Option A. Blame the discrepancies on external factors such as network issues or user behavior changes without further internal investigation. Option B. Immediately adjust the reported metrics to align with the user activity logs, focusing on meeting the quarterly targets. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive investigation into the data collection and reporting processes to identify the root cause of the discrepancies and implement corrective actions. Option D. Document the discrepancies as minor variances and continue reporting as usual, assuming they will self-correct over time. The correct answer is C. Initiate a comprehensive investigation into the data collection and reporting processes to identify the root cause of the discrepancies and implement corrective actions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing operational efficiency with the ethical imperative of accurate data representation and customer trust. The pressure to meet performance targets can create a temptation to manipulate data, which directly conflicts with principles of integrity and transparency. Professionals must navigate this tension by prioritizing ethical conduct and regulatory compliance over short-term gains. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation into the root cause of the discrepancies. This demonstrates a commitment to understanding the underlying issues rather than simply masking symptoms. By identifying and addressing the systemic problems, the company upholds its ethical obligation to provide accurate information to customers and stakeholders. This aligns with principles of data integrity and responsible business practices, which are implicitly expected in any regulated environment, even if specific regulations are not explicitly cited for this assessment. It fosters a culture of accountability and continuous improvement. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately correcting the data without understanding the cause. This is a superficial fix that fails to address the underlying problem, potentially leading to recurring issues and a lack of trust in the data. It suggests a reactive rather than proactive approach to data management and quality. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the discrepancies, especially if they do not immediately impact key performance indicators. This is a severe ethical failure, as it knowingly allows for the dissemination of inaccurate information. It violates the principle of honesty and can lead to significant reputational damage and potential regulatory scrutiny if discovered. A third incorrect approach is to attribute the discrepancies to external factors without proper investigation. While external factors can play a role, a responsible professional would first exhaust all internal possibilities and gather evidence before concluding that the issue lies solely outside the organization's control. This approach avoids accountability and hinders problem solving. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured problem-solving framework. This involves 1. Identifying the problem clearly and objectively, 2. Gathering all relevant information and data, 3. Analyzing the root causes of the problem, 4. Developing and evaluating potential solutions, 5. Implementing the chosen solution and monitoring its effectiveness, 6. Documenting the process and lessons learned. In situations involving data integrity, ethical considerations and the potential for regulatory impact must always be paramount. Question 10. Examination of the data shows a need to consolidate customer feedback from multiple sources into a single, usable dataset for trend analysis. The available data includes structured reports from an internal CRM, unstructured text files from customer support emails, and a spreadsheet of survey responses from a third-party provider. The goal is to create a unified dataset that accurately reflects customer sentiment and can be used for product development insights. Option A. Utilize Amazon's approved data integration platform and follow the documented procedures for importing and transforming data from all specified sources, ensuring data validation checks are performed at each stage. Option B. Access the raw data files of the CRM and the third-party provider directly via their cloud storage, bypassing internal systems, to perform the consolidation. Option C. Download the third-party survey spreadsheet and manually copy-paste relevant sections into the CRM's data entry interface, then manually parse the email text to extract keywords. Option D. Directly merge the raw text files from customer support emails with the CRM data and the survey spreadsheet using a custom script written by a colleague, assuming the script handles basic formatting. The correct answer is A. Utilize Amazon's approved data integration platform and follow the documented procedures for importing and transforming data from all specified sources, ensuring data validation checks are performed at each stage. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for efficient data processing with the imperative to maintain data integrity and comply with Amazon's internal data handling policies, which are designed to prevent unauthorized access and ensure data accuracy. The core difficulty lies in identifying a method that is both effective for the immediate task and adheres to established protocols, avoiding shortcuts that could lead to data corruption or security breaches. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves leveraging Amazon's approved internal tools and documented procedures for data aggregation. This aligns with best professional practice, because it ensures that all data manipulations are performed within a controlled environment, subject to audit trails, and in accordance with Amazon's security and privacy standards. Utilizing these established methods minimizes the risk of introducing errors, unauthorized data exposure, or violating internal compliance guidelines. It demonstrates a commitment to responsible data stewardship and operational integrity. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to directly access and modify raw data files from an unapproved external source. This poses a significant regulatory and ethical failure by bypassing established data validation and security protocols. It increases the risk of data corruption, introduces potential for malware or unauthorized access, and violates Amazon's data governance policies, which mandate the use of secure, internal systems for all data operations. Another incorrect approach is to rely on informal, undocumented scripts developed by a colleague without proper review or integration into approved workflows. This represents a failure in process adherence and quality control. Such scripts may contain hidden bugs, security vulnerabilities, or produce inaccurate results, leading to flawed analysis and potential compliance issues. It also undermines the principle of standardized, auditable processes. A third incorrect approach is to assume that data from a seemingly reputable external vendor can be directly imported and used without verification. While the vendor may be reputable, data transfer and integration processes must still adhere to Amazon's internal data quality and security checks. Failure to do so can lead to the introduction of erroneous data into Amazon systems, impacting downstream analyses and decision-making, and potentially violating data import regulations or agreements. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should prioritize understanding and adhering to established internal policies and procedures. The decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the objective of the data task. 2. Consulting available internal documentation and approved toolsets. 3. If unsure, seeking guidance from supervisors or designated compliance officers. 4. Prioritizing data integrity, security, and compliance over speed or convenience when conflicts arise. This systematic approach ensures that actions are both effective and ethically sound, minimizing risks to the organization. Question 11. Performance analysis shows that a senior team member consistently meets their core project deliverables on time and within budget. However, during recent strategic planning sessions, this individual has not contributed novel ideas or proactively guided the team towards innovative solutions, which are key expectations for their senior role. How should their manager address this performance gap? Option A. Schedule a meeting to discuss the specific qualitative expectations of their senior role. Provide concrete examples of where strategic input and innovation were expected but not demonstrated, and collaboratively develop a performance improvement plan with measurable goals for enhanced strategic contribution and idea generation. Option B. Provide general feedback that the employee needs to be more of a team player and think outside the box without offering specific examples or a structured plan for improvement. Option C. Acknowledge their consistent delivery of core tasks and conclude that their performance is acceptable for their current role, deferring discussions about strategic contributions to future team-wide initiatives. Option D. Inform the employee that while their core tasks are satisfactory, their lack of innovative contributions means they are not meeting the full requirements of their senior position, and suggest they consider a role with less strategic responsibility. The correct answer is A. Schedule a meeting to discuss the specific qualitative expectations of their senior role, provide concrete examples of where strategic input and innovation were expected but not demonstrated, and collaboratively develop a performance improvement plan with measurable goals for enhanced strategic contribution and idea generation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in performance management where an employee's output, while meeting basic requirements, lacks the innovative contribution expected for a senior role. The difficulty lies in balancing objective performance metrics with subjective qualitative assessments of leadership and strategic thinking, especially when the employee has a history of solid, albeit unexceptional, performance. The professional challenge is to provide constructive feedback that motivates improvement without demotivating the employee or creating grounds for a dispute, while also ensuring the team's overall strategic goals are met. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a structured, multifaceted discussion that acknowledges past contributions while clearly articulating the gap between current performance and the expectations for a senior role. This includes providing specific examples of where innovation or strategic leadership was lacking, and collaboratively developing a plan with measurable goals for improvement. This aligns with best professional practices in performance management, which emphasize clear communication, fairness, and a focus on development. Ethically, it upholds the principle of treating employees with respect and providing them with the opportunity to succeed. From a regulatory perspective, assuming a general employment law framework that values fair process and non-discriminatory practices. This approach documents the performance issues and the steps taken to address them, which is crucial for any future employment decisions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to focus solely on the quantitative metrics and declare the employee is meeting expectations, ignoring the qualitative aspects of a senior role. This fails to address the core issue of strategic contribution and innovation, which is a failure of professional responsibility to develop talent and ensure team effectiveness. Ethically, it is disingenuous to the employee and the team by not providing honest feedback. Also creates a regulatory risk by not properly documenting performance deficiencies, which could be problematic if the employee's performance later leads to disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach is to immediately label the employee as underperforming and suggest a demotion or termination without a clear, documented performance improvement plan. This is professionally reckless and ethically unsound, as it bypasses the opportunity for development and improvement. It also carries significant regulatory risk, as it could be perceived as unfair dismissal or discrimination if not handled with extreme care and proper documentation of prior feedback and support. A third incorrect approach is to provide vague feedback about not being a good fit or lacking leadership potential without concrete examples or actionable steps. This is unprofessional, unhelpful, and ethically questionable. It leaves the employee confused and unable to improve, and it fails to meet the professional obligation to provide clear, constructive criticism. From a regulatory standpoint, such vague feedback is insufficient to justify any adverse employment action and could be challenged as arbitrary. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach performance discussions with a framework that prioritizes clear communication, fairness, and development. This involves 1. Preparing thoroughly by gathering specific examples of performance against expectations. 2. Conducting a balanced review that acknowledges strengths and clearly outlines areas for improvement. 3. Collaborating with the employee to set SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound goals for development. And 4. Establishing a follow-up schedule to monitor progress and provide ongoing support. This process ensures that performance management is a tool for growth and accountability, rather than just a punitive measure. Question 12. System analysis indicates a need to enhance fraud detection capabilities for online transactions. The current system primarily relies on basic transaction monitoring. To improve accuracy and identify more sophisticated fraudulent activities, the system could potentially analyze a wider range of customer data, including browsing history on the platform, past purchase patterns beyond immediate transaction details, and device information. However, this expanded analysis raises privacy concerns. What is the most appropriate course of action to balance enhanced fraud detection with customer privacy and regulatory compliance? Option A. Limit data analysis strictly to basic transaction monitoring to ensure maximum customer privacy, even if it means a higher risk of undetected fraud. Option B. Broaden the analysis of all customer data without explicit consent, relying on the company's internal policy that allows for data usage for fraud prevention. Option C. Implement a system that analyzes a broader scope of customer data for fraud detection, clearly informing customers of this enhanced monitoring in the terms of service and providing an opt-out mechanism. Option D. Develop a new system that analyzes customer data for fraud detection only after a transaction has been flagged as potentially fraudulent by the basic monitoring system. The correct answer is C. Implement a system that analyzes a broader scope of customer data for fraud detection, clearly informing customers of this enhanced monitoring in the terms of service and providing an opt-out mechanism. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing customer privacy with the need for effective fraud detection. Core tension lies in how much personal data can be accessed and analyzed without infringing on customer trust and regulatory compliance. Professionals must exercise careful judgment to ensure that data usage is both necessary for security and proportionate to the risk. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes obtaining explicit consent for data analysis beyond basic transaction monitoring. This aligns with data protection principles, such as those found in GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. If this were a UK/CISI context, which emphasizes lawful processing, purpose limitation, and data minimization. Obtaining consent ensures transparency and empowers customers to understand and control how their data is used for fraud prevention, thereby building trust and adhering to ethical standards. It also minimizes the risk of regulatory penalties for unauthorized data processing. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves broadly analyzing all customer data without specific consent, even if the stated purpose is fraud prevention. This violates the principle of purpose limitation, as data collected for one reason, e.g., account management, is being used for another, advanced fraud profiling, without explicit agreement. It also risks overcollection and excessive processing, contravening data minimization principles. Ethically, it erodes customer trust by making assumptions about their willingness to have their data scrutinized beyond what is strictly necessary for service provision. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on internal policies that permit broad data analysis for fraud detection, without considering the need for customer notification or consent. While internal policies are important, they must be grounded in and compliant with external regulatory frameworks and ethical best practices. Such an approach could lead to regulatory breaches if the policies themselves are not aligned with data protection laws, and it fails to uphold the ethical obligation of transparency with customers. A further incorrect approach is to limit data analysis to only the most obvious fraudulent patterns, ignoring potentially sophisticated methods. While this might seem to protect privacy by minimizing data use, it can be professionally negligent. If a more comprehensive analysis, even with consent, could prevent significant financial loss or harm to customers, and the company, failing to implement it due to an overly restrictive interpretation of privacy, could be seen as a failure of due diligence and risk management. The ethical responsibility extends to taking reasonable steps to protect the business and its customers from foreseeable harm. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based and consent-driven approach. First, identify the specific fraud risks and the data necessary to mitigate them. Second, assess whether existing data processing activities are sufficient or if additional data analysis is required. Third, if additional analysis is needed, determine the appropriate level of customer notification and consent. This involves clearly communicating the purpose, scope, and benefits of the data analysis, and providing customers with meaningful choices. Fourth, ensure all data processing activities are documented and comply with relevant regulations and internal policies. This iterative process of assessment, communication, and compliance ensures both effective risk management and ethical data handling. Question 13. Analysis of a situation where a former employee, having recently joined a competitor, possesses a detailed customer contact list acquired during their previous employment. This list contains not only names and contact details, but also notes on purchasing history and preferences. The employee is considering leveraging this information to proactively reach out to these customers for their new employer. What is the most professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Share the customer list with the new company's sales team, explaining that it was acquired during previous employment and could be a valuable resource for generating immediate sales. Option B. Immediately begin contacting customers from the list, highlighting the benefits of the new company's offerings and referencing their past purchasing behavior to personalize the outreach. Option C. Attempt to anonymize the data by removing direct identifiers before using it for outreach, believing this mitigates any privacy concerns. Option D. Refrain from using the customer list and any associated knowledge of purchasing history or preferences, and instead focus on developing new leads through legitimate means available at the new company. The correct answer is D. Refrain from using the customer list and any associated knowledge of purchasing history or preferences, and instead focus on developing new leads through legitimate means available at the new company. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the potential misuse of confidential customer information obtained during a previous employment. The core difficulty lies in balancing the individual's right to pursue new opportunities with the employer's legitimate interest in protecting proprietary data and maintaining fair competition. Navigating this requires a keen understanding of data privacy regulations and ethical obligations regarding confidential information. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the former employer's confidentiality agreements and relevant data protection laws. This ensures that any actions taken are compliant with legal and contractual obligations. Specifically, it requires the individual to refrain from using or disclosing any confidential information acquired during their previous role. This aligns with the ethical principle of respecting proprietary information and upholding contractual commitments, which are often reinforced by data protection legislation that prohibits unauthorized access or disclosure of sensitive data. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately using the acquired customer list in the new role. This directly violates confidentiality agreements and likely breaches data protection laws, such as those governing the handling of personal data, by using information obtained without proper authorization for a new business purpose. This constitutes a failure to respect proprietary rights and a potential violation of privacy regulations. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because the information is in the individual's possession, it can be used freely. This overlooks the legal and ethical implications of how that information was obtained and the restrictions placed upon its use by previous employment contracts and data privacy frameworks. It represents a disregard for contractual obligations and the principles of data stewardship. A further incorrect approach is to seek advice from colleagues at the new company without disclosing the confidential nature of the information. This could inadvertently lead to the dissemination of sensitive data or create a situation where the new company is complicit in a data breach or breach of contract, exposing both the individual and the new employer to legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, identify and review all relevant contractual obligations, e.g., non-disclosure agreements, employment contracts. Second, consult applicable laws and regulations concerning data privacy, confidentiality, and intellectual property. Third, seek independent legal counsel if there is any ambiguity. Fourth, prioritize ethical conduct by refraining from any action that could be construed as a breach of trust or a violation of legal statutes. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and ethically sound, protecting both the individual and their employers. Question 14. The performance metrics show a candidate performing exceptionally well in the initial stages of the Amazon hiring assessment test, but a significant dip in performance is observed in the final module, leading to a borderline overall score. The hiring manager is eager to fill the position quickly and has expressed a preference for candidates who demonstrate immediate impact. Option A. Reject the candidate based on the final module's performance, as it indicates a potential weakness that could hinder their immediate impact. Option B. Proceed with hiring the candidate but flag them for immediate remedial training on the skills tested in the final module, without further investigation into the performance dip. Option C. Immediately recommend the candidate for the role based on their strong performance in the initial stages, assuming the final module's dip was an anomaly. Option D. Request a detailed breakdown of the final module's performance, including specific areas of difficulty, and consider if the candidate's overall strengths in earlier modules outweigh the final module's performance, especially if the dip can be attributed to a specific, addressable issue. The correct answer is D. Request a detailed breakdown of the final module's performance, including specific areas of difficulty, and consider if the candidate's overall strengths in earlier modules outweigh the final module's performance, especially if the dip can be attributed to a specific, addressable issue. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for rapid problem resolution with the imperative to adhere to established Amazon hiring assessment guidelines and ethical considerations. The pressure to fill a role quickly can lead to overlooking critical procedural steps or making subjective judgments that deviate from objective assessment criteria. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the assessment process remains fair, consistent, and compliant with the principles of objective evaluation. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough and objective review of the candidate's performance against the established assessment criteria. This aligns with the Amazon hiring assessment test's emphasis on data-driven evaluation and the avoidance of bias. By seeking clarification and additional data points, the assessor demonstrates a commitment to making an informed decision based on evidence, rather than succumbing to external pressures or personal impressions. This upholds the integrity of the assessment process and ensures that candidates are evaluated fairly and consistently. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the initial, potentially incomplete, performance metrics fails to acknowledge the possibility of anomalies or the need for deeper investigation. This could lead to an unfair assessment of the candidate, either by overlooking strengths or by penalizing them for issues that have valid explanations not captured by the initial data. This approach risks violating the principle of objective evaluation by making a decision based on insufficient evidence. Another incorrect approach that involves making a subjective judgment based on a gut feeling or a perceived cultural fit without concrete evidence from the assessment metrics is a significant ethical and professional failure. This introduces personal bias into the hiring process, which is contrary to the principles of fair and equitable assessment. Such an approach can lead to discriminatory hiring practices and undermines the credibility of the assessment. A further incorrect approach that involves immediately rejecting the candidate based on a single negative metric, without exploring contributing factors or seeking further information, demonstrates a lack of thoroughness and a failure to apply a holistic evaluation. This can lead to the loss of potentially valuable talent due to an overly simplistic interpretation of performance data. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, thoroughly review all available objective data. Second, identify any discrepancies or areas requiring further clarification. Third, proactively seek additional information or context to address these ambiguities. Fourth, consult established assessment guidelines and principles to ensure objectivity and fairness. Finally, make a decision based on a comprehensive understanding of the evidence, free from undue pressure or personal bias. Question 15. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential for expedited data processing for a critical customer-facing feature, but the proposed method involves accessing a broader dataset than typically permitted by current data governance policies. A senior team member suggests bypassing the standard data access request protocol, citing their extensive experience and the urgent need for deployment. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Escalate the proposed deviation to the relevant data governance or security team for review and approval, explaining the rationale for the expedited processing and the proposed data access, and await their decision before proceeding. Option B. Inform the senior team member that their suggestion is not feasible due to policy restrictions, and instruct them to adhere strictly to the existing data access protocols, even if it delays the feature deployment. Option C. Proceed with the proposed data access method as suggested by the senior team member, trusting their experience to manage any associated risks. Option D. Implement the proposed data access method on a trial basis for a limited period to assess its impact, and then decide whether to formalize it. Correct answer is A. Escalate the proposed deviation to the relevant data governance or security team for review and approval, explaining the rationale for the expedited processing and the proposed data access, and await their decision before proceeding. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a team member's desire for efficiency and the critical need for robust data privacy controls. The pressure to deliver quickly can lead to shortcuts that bypass established security protocols, potentially exposing sensitive customer information. Careful judgment is required to balance operational demands with regulatory compliance and ethical obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes adherence to Amazon's established data handling policies and relevant privacy regulations. This involves seeking explicit approval for any deviation from standard procedures, ensuring that any proposed alternative method undergoes a thorough risk assessment and receives sign-off from the appropriate compliance or security teams. This demonstrates best professional practice by upholding the principle of data minimization and security by design, which are fundamental to maintaining customer trust and complying with regulations like the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, or similar Amazon-specific data protection guidelines. It ensures that any potential risks are identified and mitigated before they can materialize into a breach. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the proposed data access method without formal approval. This represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It bypasses the established control framework designed to protect sensitive data, potentially violating data privacy laws by not adhering to principles of lawful processing and data security. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for the company's commitment to customer privacy and a lack of accountability. Another incorrect approach is to assume that the team member's experience is sufficient justification for bypassing standard procedures. While experience is valuable, it does not supersede documented policies and regulatory requirements. This approach fails to recognize that even experienced individuals can overlook critical security considerations, and that a formal review process is in place to catch such oversights. This can lead to unintentional noncompliance with data protection laws and a breach of trust with customers. A third incorrect approach is to delay the decision indefinitely, hoping the issue resolves itself or that the urgency subsides. This is professionally irresponsible as it leaves the team in a state of uncertainty and potentially hinders legitimate business operations without addressing the underlying risk. It also fails to proactively manage the situation and could lead to a more critical issue arising from inaction. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process when faced with such dilemmas. This involves 1. Identifying the core issue, a conflict between efficiency and security/compliance. 2. Consulting relevant policies and regulations, understanding the established rules for data handling. 3. Assessing the risks, evaluating the potential consequences of both proceeding and not proceeding with the proposed method. 4. Seeking appropriate guidance, engaging with compliance, legal, or security teams for clarification and approval. 5. Documenting the decision and rationale, maintaining a record of the process and the final outcome. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and ethically sound. Question 16. Research into Amazon's hiring assessment test procedures reveals a new cohort of temporary associates are being onboarded rapidly. The hiring manager is concerned about ensuring these associates understand Amazon's internal hiring policies and relevant employment laws from the outset, but also faces pressure to get them productive quickly. What is the most appropriate approach to balance these competing demands while ensuring regulatory compliance? Option A. Conduct a brief, high-level overview of key hiring policies and laws, with minimal opportunity for questions, to expedite their integration into operational duties. Option B. Rely on the associates' prior experience in similar roles to infer their understanding of Amazon's specific hiring policies and relevant employment laws. Skipping formal training. Option C. Provide a comprehensive training module covering Amazon's hiring policies and relevant employment law, followed by a Q and a session and a confirmation of understanding before assigning any tasks. Option D. Immediately assign tasks to the new associates, assuming they will learn Amazon's policies and relevant laws through on-the-job experience and observation. The correct answer is C. Provide a comprehensive training module covering Amazon's hiring policies and relevant employment law, followed by a Q and a session and a confirmation of understanding before assigning any tasks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a company's desire for rapid growth and the imperative to maintain robust regulatory compliance. Need to quickly onboard new employees while ensuring they understand and adhere to Amazon's specific hiring policies and relevant labor laws creates a complex operational and ethical tightrope. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency with thoroughness, ensuring that shortcuts do not compromise legal standing or ethical treatment of candidates. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, documented, and legally sound onboarding process. This involves clearly communicating Amazon's hiring policies, which are designed to ensure fairness, non-discrimination, and adherence to labor laws. By providing comprehensive training on these policies and offering a clear channel for questions, the company demonstrates a commitment to ethical hiring and mitigates the risk of legal challenges arising from misunderstandings or non-compliance by new hires. This proactive stance protects both the company and the employees. An incorrect approach that involves immediately assigning tasks without adequate policy review poses significant regulatory and ethical failures. This could lead to unintentional discrimination, violation of data privacy regulations, if applicable to the role, or breaches of employment law, all of which carry substantial legal penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on speed and assuming new hires will learn policies on the job, demonstrates a disregard for established compliance frameworks and a lack of due diligence. This creates an environment where errors are likely, and the company cannot credibly defend its hiring practices if challenged. A third incorrect approach, providing only a brief overview of policies without opportunity for clarification, fails to ensure genuine understanding and can be seen as a superficial attempt at compliance, leaving employees vulnerable to making mistakes. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core regulatory requirements and company policies relevant to the situation. They should then assess the potential risks associated with different approaches, considering both legal and ethical implications. Prioritizing a solution that ensures clear communication, adequate training, and opportunities for feedback, even if it requires slightly more time, is crucial for long-term success and risk mitigation. This involves a commitment to a culture of compliance where adherence to regulations is seen as integral to business operations, not an impediment to them. Question 17. Market research demonstrates a significant emerging trend in consumer demand for a new product feature. Preliminary internal analysis suggests our product could meet this demand, but the data is not yet fully validated, and the regulatory landscape for such claims is complex. What is the most appropriate next step for the marketing and product development teams? Option A. Proceed with developing marketing materials that highlight the potential for the new feature, while internally noting that the claims are based on preliminary findings and subject to further verification. Option B. Halt all product development and marketing efforts related to this feature until absolute certainty regarding market demand and regulatory approval is achieved, to avoid any potential missteps. Option C. Immediately launch a marketing campaign emphasizing the product's ability to meet the emerging consumer demand, based on the initial positive market research indicators. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive review with legal and compliance departments to ensure any marketing claims are fully substantiated and adhere to all relevant regulations before any public announcement or campaign. The correct answer is A. Proceed with developing marketing materials that highlight the potential for the new feature, while internally noting that the claims are based on preliminary findings and subject to further verification. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a desire to leverage emerging market trends for competitive advantage and the absolute necessity of adhering to regulatory compliance. The pressure to act quickly based on preliminary, unverified information can lead to premature or unsubstantiated claims, which can have significant legal and reputational consequences. The professional must exercise sound judgment to balance innovation with regulatory boundaries. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes regulatory compliance by ensuring that all marketing claims are substantiated and align with established guidelines before public dissemination. This demonstrates best professional practice by upholding the integrity of the company's communications and protecting consumers from misleading information. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of truthfulness and fairness in advertising, which are fundamental to consumer protection regulations. By seeking internal legal and compliance review, the professional ensures that the claims meet the stringent requirements of the relevant regulatory framework, thereby mitigating risk and fostering trust. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately launching the marketing campaign based on the preliminary market research. This represents a significant regulatory failure because it bypasses the crucial step of substantiating claims, potentially leading to violations of advertising standards that prohibit deceptive or unsubstantiated marketing. Ethically, it is a failure to act with integrity and transparency towards consumers. Another incorrect approach is to delay any marketing efforts indefinitely due to the perceived complexity of regulatory approval. This is professionally unsound as it stifles innovation and market responsiveness without a clear, reasoned justification. While compliance is paramount, an overly cautious or paralyzed approach can be detrimental to business objectives and may not be in line with the spirit of regulations that aim to foster fair competition, not hinder it entirely. A third incorrect approach is to make vague or aspirational claims that are not directly tied to the verified research. This is a subtle but serious regulatory and ethical failure. While not outright false, Such claims can be misleading by creating an impression of product capabilities or market positioning that is not yet demonstrably supported, thereby eroding consumer trust and potentially violating regulations against deceptive practices. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, thoroughly understand the specific regulatory requirements pertaining to marketing claims in the relevant jurisdiction. Second, critically evaluate the preliminary research for its robustness and the extent to which it can support concrete claims. Third, engage proactively with internal legal and compliance teams to interpret the research in light of regulatory expectations. Fourth, develop marketing materials that are factually accurate, verifiable, and compliant. Finally, establish a process for ongoing monitoring and review of marketing claims to ensure continued adherence to regulations as market conditions and product offerings evolve. Question 18. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new, streamlined process for approving certain low-value vendor payments could save significant operational time and resources. However, this proposed process bypasses a mandatory multi-level approval step that is currently in place to ensure adherence to vendor onboarding and payment verification policies, which are designed to prevent fraudulent transactions and ensure compliance with financial regulations. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Proceed with the streamlined process, but document the deviation and the cost-benefit rationale for future reference. Option B. Adhere to the existing multi-level approval process, as it is designed to mitigate regulatory and financial risks, and explore alternative methods for improving efficiency that do not compromise established controls. Option C. Seek an exception from the compliance department to permanently waive the multi-level approval for these specific types of payments, citing the cost-benefit analysis. Option D. Implement the streamlined process immediately, as the cost savings and efficiency gains outweigh the perceived minimal risk of the bypassed approval step. Correct answer is D. Implement the streamlined process immediately, as the cost savings and efficiency gains outweigh the perceived minimal risk of the bypassed approval step. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to balancing operational efficiency with regulatory compliance. The core difficulty lies in interpreting and applying Amazon's internal policies, which are designed to align with external regulatory frameworks. In a situation where a direct, immediate cost saving is apparent but potential long-term risks are not fully quantified, the pressure to demonstrate cost savings can conflict with the imperative to maintain robust compliance procedures, requiring careful judgment and a thorough understanding of both internal guidelines and their underlying regulatory intent. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing the established internal control procedures, even if they appear to add immediate overhead. This is because these procedures are designed to mitigate risks that have been identified by Amazon as significant enough to warrant formalization. These internal controls are typically built upon the foundation of regulatory requirements and best practices aimed at preventing fraud, ensuring data integrity, and maintaining customer trust. Adhering to these established protocols, even when a shortcut seems tempting, represents best professional practice because it upholds the principle of compliance by design and demonstrates a commitment to risk management over short-term gains. This approach aligns with the ethical obligation to act with integrity and to protect the company and its stakeholders from potential regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and financial losses. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves bypassing the established internal control procedure for a one-time cost saving. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it disregards the documented risk mitigation strategies put in place by the company. Such an action could lead to undetected errors, data manipulation, or even fraudulent activity, which could have severe consequences if discovered during an audit or by regulatory bodies. It undermines the integrity of the company's financial reporting and operational processes. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the shortcut without seeking clarification or approval from a supervisor or the relevant compliance department. This demonstrates a lack of accountability and a failure to adhere to established escalation protocols. It suggests an assumption that the individual has the authority to unilaterally alter or ignore company procedures, which is a significant breach of professional conduct and can lead to inconsistent application of policies across the organization. A further incorrect approach is to assume that the cost-benefit analysis alone justifies deviating from policy, without considering the qualitative risks and the potential for unforeseen negative consequences. This is a failure to adopt a holistic risk management perspective. Regulatory frameworks often require a precautionary principle, where potential harms are considered even if their likelihood or magnitude is difficult to precisely quantify. Relying solely on a quantifiable cost-benefit analysis, especially when it involves circumventing established controls, can lead to significant compliance breaches. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a dilemma should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes risk assessment and adherence to established policies. First, they should thoroughly understand the purpose and regulatory underpinnings of the internal control procedure in question. Second, they should evaluate the potential risks associated with bypassing the procedure, considering both direct and indirect consequences, including regulatory, financial, and reputational impacts. Third, if there is any ambiguity or a perceived opportunity for improvement, they should consult with their manager or the relevant compliance and legal departments to seek guidance and ensure alignment with company policy and regulatory expectations. This process ensures that decisions are made with a comprehensive understanding of the implications and in accordance with the highest standards of professional conduct and regulatory compliance. Question 19. Which approach would be most effective in ensuring Amazon's new cloud-based AI service complies with the latest data privacy regulations when launching in a new international market? Option A. Perform a cursory review of the most prominent data privacy regulations in the target market and implement minimal changes to the service's data collection methods, focusing on broad compliance statements rather than specific technical adjustments. Option B. Proceed with the launch, assuming existing global data privacy policies are sufficient, and address any specific market concerns only if they are raised by local authorities after the service is operational. Option C. Prioritize the speed of market entry and revenue generation, with a plan to retroactively adjust data handling practices if regulatory issues arise, relying on the company's strong legal team to manage any potential disputes. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive legal review of all applicable data privacy laws in the target market. Engage local compliance experts to interpret specific requirements, and integrate necessary data handling protocols and customer consent mechanisms into the service's design from inception. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive legal review of all applicable data privacy laws in the target market, engage local compliance experts to interpret specific requirements, and integrate necessary data handling protocols and customer consent mechanisms into the service's design from inception. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a company's desire to innovate and expand its service offerings, and the imperative to adhere to evolving regulatory frameworks designed to protect consumers and market integrity. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for misinterpreting or inadequately implementing new regulations, which could lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The core of the challenge lies in proactively identifying and integrating compliance requirements into business strategy, rather than treating them as an afterthought. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, proactive, and integrated understanding of the regulatory landscape. This involves not just identifying applicable regulations, but also interpreting their implications for the specific business operations and developing robust internal controls and training programs to ensure adherence. This aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to customers and the legal obligation to operate within the bounds of the law. Specifically, it demonstrates a commitment to responsible business conduct, which is a cornerstone of long-term sustainability and market leadership. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential revenue gains without a commensurate investment in understanding and implementing compliance measures is professionally unacceptable. This represents a failure to uphold the duty of care and a disregard for legal obligations, potentially leading to violations of consumer protection laws and market manipulation regulations. Another incorrect approach that relies on a superficial review of regulations, assuming existing processes are sufficient, is also flawed. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and an underestimation of the complexity and nuances of regulatory requirements, which can result in unintentional noncompliance. A third incorrect approach that delays compliance efforts until enforcement actions are initiated is a reactive and high-risk strategy. This not only exposes the company to penalties, but also signals a lack of commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory responsibility, undermining stakeholder confidence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, identify all relevant regulatory bodies and frameworks applicable to the proposed business activity. Second, conduct a comprehensive assessment of how these regulations impact current and future operations, including potential risks and required changes. Third, engage legal and compliance experts to interpret complex provisions and guide the development of compliant processes. Fourth, integrate compliance requirements into the design and implementation phases of new initiatives, ensuring adequate resources and training are allocated. Finally, establish ongoing monitoring and review mechanisms to adapt to changes in the regulatory environment and maintain a high standard of compliance. Question 20. The review process indicates that a candidate's submitted documentation for the Amazon hiring assessment test appears to be missing a key component, though the candidate has verbally assured the assessor that all necessary information has been provided. The assessor is under pressure to expedite the hiring timeline. Which of the following actions best aligns with regulatory compliance and professional best practices? Option A. Halt the assessment process and request the candidate to submit all required documentation in full before proceeding with any evaluation. Option B. Reject the candidate's submission immediately due to the apparent omission, without offering an opportunity for clarification or correction. Option C. Approve the candidate's submission based on their verbal assurance, prioritizing the expedited hiring timeline over a complete document review. Option D. Proceed with the assessment, making a note to follow up on the missing documentation after the candidate has been evaluated. Correct answer is D. Proceed with the assessment, making a note to follow up on the missing documentation after the candidate has been evaluated. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a desire to expedite a process and the absolute necessity of adhering to established regulatory compliance procedures. The pressure to deliver quickly can lead to shortcuts, which, in a regulated environment like Amazon's hiring assessment, can have significant consequences, including legal repercussions, reputational damage, and unfair assessment of candidates. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency with integrity. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough review of all submitted documentation against the established Amazon hiring assessment test guidelines. This ensures that the assessment process is fair, consistent, and compliant with internal policies and any relevant external regulations that govern hiring practices. Adhering to the documented process, even if it appears slower, represents best professional practice because it upholds the integrity of the assessment, minimizes the risk of bias, and ensures that all candidates are evaluated on the same objective criteria. This aligns with ethical hiring principles and the regulatory expectation of due diligence. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves approving the candidate's submission without a complete review based on a verbal assurance of completeness. This is a regulatory failure because it bypasses the mandated verification steps. It is ethically unsound as it introduces potential bias and unfairness, assuming the candidate's word over established procedures. This approach risks overlooking critical omissions or misrepresentations that could invalidate the assessment or lead to the hiring of an unqualified individual. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the assessment based on a partial review, with the intention of completing the full review later. This is a procedural and regulatory failure. It violates the principle of a complete and accurate assessment at the point of evaluation. Ethically, it is problematic as it creates an uneven playing field for candidates, potentially disadvantaging those whose full documentation might have been scrutinized more rigorously if the process were followed correctly from the outset. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss the submission due to a minor, easily correctable omission without offering the candidate an opportunity to rectify it. While adherence to guidelines is crucial, an overly rigid interpretation that lacks reasonable flexibility can be seen as procedurally unfair and potentially discriminatory if not applied consistently. This approach fails to uphold the spirit of a fair assessment process, which often allows for minor corrections to ensure all relevant information is considered. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing regulations and internal policies. They must then assess the situation against these established standards. When faced with potential deviations, the professional should first consider the impact on fairness, accuracy, and compliance. The default should always be to follow the documented process. If a deviation is contemplated, it must be justifiable, documented, and approved through appropriate channels, with a clear understanding of the risks involved. In this specific case, the priority is to ensure the integrity of the hiring assessment by completing the required documentation review before proceeding.